When you and the narcissist both stop contacting each other, it can feel like standing in the silence after a long, chaotic storm. For the first time, there are no messages, no arguments, no manipulation, no guilt tripping, and no drama pulling you back in. And yet, the quiet feels confusing. You wonder, are they thinking about me? Do they miss me? Are they going to come back? What happens now? This moment, this strange pause, is one of the most powerful turning points in a survivor's healing journey, because what comes next often reveals truths people never expected. And today, we're breaking down exactly what happens when both sides go silent, and why the next chapter might shock you. Let's walk through 5 key shifts that unfold after mutual no contact, and what each one means for your emotional freedom, your identity, and your future healing. When contact finally stops, something inside you shifts in a way that's hard to describe. You would think silence brings peace, that distance should calm the heart and mind. But instead, the first thing many people feel is anxiety, sharp, unexpected, and overwhelming. It almost feels unfair. After everything you endured, after all the chaos, the manipulation, the confusion, shouldn't the quiet bring relief? And yet, this is the strange truth. Your nervous system has been on high alert for so long that calm doesn't feel like calm. It feels like danger. It feels like something is missing, something is wrong, something is about to happen, even though nothing is happening at all. This is the emotional detox phase. It's the moment when your body, not your mind, begins the healing process. Narcissistic relationships operate almost like emotional roller coasters. There are moments of charm, validation, affection, promises, and then moments of withdrawal, criticism, anger, or silent treatment. That inconsistency creates what psychologists call trauma bonding, and these bonds aren't just emotional, they're chemical. Your brain adapts to unpredictability. It gets conditioned to expect the highs after the lows, the apology after the argument, the "I miss you" after days of silence. The cycle becomes a rhythm, one so familiar that your system starts depending on it, not because it was healthy, but because it was repetitive. So when that communication stops, whether you were the one who ended it or they pulled away, your brain reacts the way it reacts when a substance leaves the body. Scientists have compared intermittent reinforcement to addictive substances, and there's truth in that. You were trained to brace for chaos and to cling to the tiny bits of warmth that followed it. Now, in the absence of both the chaos and the tiny shards of warmth, your system scrambles for something to hold on to. Many survivors describe it as a hollow feeling, that sense of, I don't miss the person, but I miss something. And that something is the routine. You were living in constant reaction mode for so long that your body forgot how to exist without scanning for the next emotional hit, the next manipulation, the next shift in their mood. Even your silence with them may feel familiar, but this silence, true silence, feels different. It's quiet in a way that's unsettling because for the first time you're completely removed from their emotional pull, and your brain doesn't understand that yet. The fear that rises during this phase can be intense. You may find yourself questioning whether you made the right decision. You may feel tempted to break no contact just to ease the discomfort. You may find yourself imagining their life without you, wondering if they've already replaced you, if they've already moved on, if they're happy, or if they're thinking about you at all. The mind spirals because it suddenly has space to spiral. When you were in the relationship, your mental energy was consumed by managing the narcissist. Now, stripped of that responsibility, your thoughts turn inward, and sometimes that internal space feels terrifying. But here's the part most people don't realize. This discomfort is not a sign that you're weak or still attached. It's actually a sign that your body is recalibrating, that the trauma bond is loosening, that the withdrawal stage is beginning. Healing often looks messy at first. It shows up as confusion, sadness, restlessness, even physical symptoms like headaches, stomach pain, or insomnia. It's your nervous system learning how to operate without constant adrenaline spikes, without emotional landmines, without the push and pull cycle. There's a real emotional shock in this stage because it contradicts everything you expected. You were told by friends, by videos, by therapists that leaving would bring relief, that moving on would feel lighter. But no one prepared you for the detox. No one warned you that your mind might cling harder in the absence of the very thing that hurt you. It's the same reason people sometimes grieve toxic situations more intensely than healthy ones. The body becomes used to a certain level of emotional noise, and silence feels like loss. What helps is understanding that this feeling is temporary. The anxiety spike is not a sign you should go back. It's a sign you're finally out. It's the psychological equivalent of your lungs relearning how to breathe after being held underwater. You're not gasping because the water was better. You're gasping because freedom feels unfamiliar. And with time, the discomfort begins to fade. You start noticing moments where you feel lighter, even if just for a second. You catch yourself not thinking about them. You realize you made it through the day without checking your phone or wondering about their next move. These tiny moments are the first signs of emotional detox working. One person once described the process like this. At first, I felt like something had been ripped out of me, but months later I realized that what actually left was the anxiety I mistook for love. That's what detox does. It removes the emotional toxins, the confusion, the dependency, but the removal feels painful before it feels liberating. This phase also exposes how deeply you were conditioned to prioritize their emotions over your own. When communication ends, your mind may automatically look for ways to blame itself. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I should have been more patient. These thoughts are not truth. They are residue, leftover imprints from years of manipulation, gaslighting, or emotional inconsistency. And as those imprints fade, clarity takes their place. And here's the most shocking part. Your healing actually begins at the exact moment you feel the most broken. That panic, that emptiness, that emotional ache. It isn't a sign of failure. It's your brain clearing out emotional debris, clearing out the confusion, clearing out the habits that kept you tied to someone who did not value your well-being. It's the system rebooting. It's the nervous system releasing what was never meant to stay. It's your body finally exiting survival mode. Over time, the detox turns into something else, strength. The silence that once felt unbearable begins to feel like protection. The absence that once felt like loss begins to feel like space. And the anxiety that once felt overwhelming becomes a reminder of how deeply you were impacted and how deeply you are healing. In the beginning, the emotional detox feels like falling apart. But piece by piece, it becomes the foundation for the life you deserve. And despite how painful the first stage is, it's the clearest sign that something inside you has decided to choose peace, even before you can feel that peace yourself. When the communication stops, most people assume the narcissist simply moves on, disappears, or loses interest. That assumption feels logical because on the outside, narcissists often look unbothered. Silent, composed, detached, maybe even thriving. But silence for them is rarely emotional. It's not about healing. It's not about closure. It's not even about acceptance. It is a strategy. And understanding this strategy is one of the most liberating realizations a survivor can reach. When contact ends, the narcissist enters an internal assessment phase. Think of it like a quiet internal calculation happening behind the scenes. They are not evaluating the relationship the way you might. They are not reflecting on the emotional loss, the connection, or the history. Narcissists typically lack the capacity for deep self-reflection in this context. What they do analyze is the loss of control, the absence of supply, the sudden break in the patterns that once revolved around them. It often shocks survivors to realize how transactional this evaluation is. While you may be grieving, processing, and trying to understand what happened, the narcissist is mentally scanning for signs. Are you still accessible? Are you still influenced by me? Are you still emotionally available if I need something? Are you hurting in a way that benefits me? These questions may never be spoken aloud, but they drive the narcissist's thought process during silence. During this assessment period, many narcissists monitor you indirectly. Not every narcissist does this, but a surprising number do. They may check your social media, ask mutual friends about you, or casually scroll through old messages to remind themselves of the attention you once gave, not because they miss the bond, but because they miss the usefulness of that bond. People often describe this phase as the calm before the Hoover, because silence doesn't always mean they're gone. It usually means they're watching. A woman once shared that her ex didn't contact her for almost 4 months after their breakup. She assumed he had moved on completely, but later she discovered he had been quietly monitoring her posts, noticing who commented on her photos, even checking whether she had viewed his stories. He said nothing, did nothing, but he was calculating. And the day she posted a quote about healing, he messaged her saying, "Thinking of you." It wasn't genuine concern. It was a test to see if she'd still respond. The silence for them is not a break from communication, it is data gathering. Narcissists are highly attuned to shifts in availability. They want to know whether their absence makes you anxious, whether you will reach out first, whether you are starting to detach, or whether you still have emotional openings they can exploit later. This is because the narcissist's sense of self-worth depends on knowing they still hold influence over you. Losing control feels like emotional death to them, and so, even in silence, their mind is actively scanning for ways to maintain psychological leverage. This isn't always conscious, sometimes it's automatic. Their need for control is wired into the way they relate to people. Another common reaction during this phase is what psychologists call resource evaluation. Narcissists categorize people based on what they provide: attention, admiration, financial help, emotional labor, stability, praise, or simply the comfort of knowing someone is always there to catch them. When contact stops, they begin asking themselves whether losing you means losing a resource. If the answer is yes, they often attempt a return later. If they think you've grown stronger or more self-aware, they may wait longer, hoping your emotional strength softens. But here's the part most survivors don't expect. Even if the narcissist doesn't return, it doesn't mean they've healed or moved on. In many cases, it simply means they have found someone else who is easier to control. Someone who doesn't yet know their patterns, someone who feeds the ego more consistently. And while it's painful to witness them shift their attention to someone new, it's important to remember that this is not a reflection of your worth. It is a reflection of their endless search for supply. A survivor once said, "I couldn't understand how he could replace me so quickly. But then I realized he wasn't replacing me, he was replacing what I gave him." That clarity changes everything, because you stop taking their silence personally. You stop interpreting their distance as abandonment, and you start seeing it as the lack of access they now have. During this assessment phase, narcissists also test boundaries without your awareness. They may send a vague message like, "Hey, hope you're okay," or "thought of you today." These aren't genuine emotional check-ins, they are probes. They are the equivalent of tapping on a locked door to see if it might crack open. And if it does, if you respond, even politely, the narcissist reads that as an opening. They interpret it as remaining influence, remaining control, remaining supply. That single moment can trigger the entire cycle all over again. But if you don't respond, if you maintain the silence, your lack of reaction becomes information for them as well. It tells them your strength has grown. It tells them their tactics no longer work. And nothing destabilizes a narcissist more than realizing someone they once controlled has become immune to their behavior. This is where the internal panic begins for them. Not the emotional panic of missing someone they love deeply, but the ego panic of losing someone who once validated their importance. The more independent you become, the more distant they feel from the control they once enjoyed. Their silence may continue, but it becomes uneasy silence, strategic silence. Their mind may race with possibilities. Have you moved on? Have you figured them out? Have you spoken to someone who helped you understand what they are? Some narcissists will try to regain control. Others will disappear entirely when they realize their tactics no longer work. Both responses are rooted in the same fear, the fear of losing power, and the silence that once felt like abandonment now becomes evidence of their insecurity. It can be strangely empowering when people reach this understanding. The narcissist's silence no longer feels like rejection. It no longer feels like something you need to fix. Instead, you begin to see it for what it really is, a moment where their ego recalculates and your life moves forward. What once felt like a void begins to feel like space, and what once felt like confusion begins to feel like clarity. Because during this assessment phase, the biggest shift is not what they discover about you, it's what you discover about them. The silence reveals the truth. Their attachment was never emotional. It was conditional. It was control-based. And once you understand that, their silence stops having power. The distance they create becomes the distance you needed all along. After the initial chaos and the spike of anxiety begins to fade, something subtle yet profound starts to happen. It isn't loud. It doesn't come with fanfare or instant relief. It's the gradual, almost imperceptible rebuilding of your sense of self. During a narcissistic relationship, identity is often eroded slowly, one small piece at a time. You may have started noticing yourself second-guessing your decisions, minimizing your feelings, apologizing unnecessarily, or even questioning your reality. Boundaries you once took for granted may have been crossed repeatedly, and over time, that repeated crossing creates doubt, confusion, and a kind of fog where your self-perception used to be. When contact ends, this fog doesn't lift immediately, but the process of reclaiming yourself quietly begins. At first, it feels like emptiness. It feels unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, because for so long, your life was oriented around someone else's emotional patterns. Your routines, your energy, your attention, even your thoughts were intertwined with theirs. Suddenly, the absence creates space, and your mind, which had been hyper-focused on anticipating their moods and reactions, now has nothing to fill it. The strange paradox is that this emptiness is not absence in the negative sense. It is the first indication that the structures of control are dissolving. It is the beginning of freedom, even if it doesn't feel like it yet. During this stage, you begin to notice small but powerful shifts in your thinking. You may catch yourself enjoying a quiet moment without feeling guilty. You may start making decisions without checking with the memory of how they might react. You may rediscover likes, dislikes, habits, and preferences that you had set aside for years. These moments are subtle, but they are signs of the self re-emerging from the shadows. It is your identity slowly reclaiming space, piece by piece. Many survivors describe it as a series of aha moments. One woman shared, "I realized I could enjoy my morning coffee without feeling guilty that I wasn't texting him. I could go for a walk, read a book, or even plan a weekend without anticipating his reaction or needing approval. It felt like discovering a part of me I didn't know was missing." These small victories may feel inconsequential at first, but they are fundamental to rebuilding the internal structure that narcissistic manipulation dismantled. Every decision, every moment of self-directed thought, every act of self-care becomes a brick in the foundation of your new identity. This stage also brings with it an increased clarity about past experiences. As the emotional fog lifts, you start noticing patterns you couldn't see before. You may recall moments of manipulation, subtle coercion, or gaslighting, and finally understand how much of your life and emotional energy was shaped by someone else's need for control. That clarity can be painful because it confirms what your intuition always suspected, that the relationship was not as balanced or as loving as you were led to believe. but it is also liberating because it provides insight. It helps you recognize the difference between conditional love and genuine connection, between manipulation and support, between control and mutual respect. During this rebuilding, your nervous system begins to stabilize. The adrenaline spikes and emotional roller coasters that once defined your daily life slow down. You begin to recognize that you no longer have to anticipate or react to chaos. The absence of constant emotional manipulation allows your body to lower its defenses. Sleep may return more easily, meals may begin to feel nourishing rather than rushed or tense, and the constant mental tension may start to ease. These physical signs are not just bodily recovery, they are intertwined with your psychological recovery. Your mind and body are reconnecting to your authentic rhythm. It is also common during this stage to experience mixed emotions. You might feel guilt for moments of happiness, as if joy is wrong after so much pain. You might feel fear when you realize how much energy you once gave to someone who did not deserve it. You might even feel doubt about whether you are truly ready to embrace this emerging self. All of these reactions are natural. They are part of processing and integrating the changes in your internal world. The mind takes time to catch up with the reality that you are no longer in the old dynamic, that you no longer need permission to exist fully, and that you are allowed to occupy space that belongs to you alone. One of the most transformative aspects of this stage is the realization that self-worth is independent of anyone else's validation. Narcissistic relationships often warp the perception of value, teaching survivors to tie their worth to how much attention, praise, or compliance they can provide. As you distance yourself, you begin to notice that your value is inherent. You notice that the love, respect, and recognition you were seeking externally can actually be cultivated internally. This internalization of worth is profoundly empowering because it creates a foundation that cannot be shaken by manipulation or absence. Stories from survivors illustrate this process vividly. One person described it as learning to walk again after being forced to crawl for years. Every confident step is cautious at first, sometimes wobbly, sometimes hesitant, but every step strengthens the legs that were weakened. Another survivor described it as opening the blinds after living in darkness. I didn't realize how dim my world had been until I started seeing the light. It was blinding at first, but it reminded me that light exists and I can step into it anytime I choose. These images capture the slow, cumulative nature of rebuilding identity after a narcissistic relationship. It is not a single moment of realization. It is an accumulation of moments where you reclaim autonomy, clarity, and self-respect. During this stage, boundaries begin to re-emerge naturally. You notice what feels comfortable and what feels toxic without needing to rationalize or overthink it. You begin to recognize when people's behavior is inappropriate or harmful, not because someone else taught you, but because your own instincts, recalibrated by experience and reflection, guide you. This ability to assert boundaries is one of the clearest indicators that identity is being rebuilt. It demonstrates that you are no longer living in the distorted framework of another person's control. Gradually, you begin to feel more whole. The absence of external control allows you to discover what feels authentic, to reconnect with passions, goals, and dreams that may have been suppressed. You may find yourself laughing more easily, feeling stronger emotional resilience, and making decisions based on what is right for you rather than what keeps someone else comfortable. It is a slow, quiet, and cumulative transformation, but it is real and tangible. The most shocking part of this rebuilding is that it often begins before you consciously realize it. You may wake up one day and notice that a thought about them no longer triggers anxiety, or that their absence no longer feels like a loss. You may notice that you are planning your future without consulting the memory of them. In these moments, it becomes clear that the identity that was once fragmented is reconnecting. and that the space the narcissist once occupied is now yours to fill with self-directed life, choice, and freedom. Over time, this stage of recovery transforms the very way you see yourself. You recognize your resilience, your capacity to heal, and your ability to exist independently. You begin to understand that you are more than the reflection in their eyes, more than the approval they withheld or granted, more than the manipulation you endured. You start to embrace the full scope of who you are, and you begin to imagine a future defined not by their presence, but by your own strength, clarity, and self-worth. One of the most difficult truths to accept after no contact is that the narcissist does not miss you. Not in the way a healthy person misses someone they cared about. They do not feel the absence of your presence, the weight of shared history, or the pain of losing someone who truly mattered. What they feel is the absence of supply. They miss the attention, the admiration, the emotional labor you once provided, the reassurance, the validation, and even the chaos that kept them at the center of your world. The person you were to them was not valued for who you were. You were valued for what you gave them, what they could extract, and how easily you could be manipulated into fulfilling their needs. This realization can be both liberating and painful. Many survivors struggle because they imagine that if the narcissist cared, they would miss them in a meaningful way. They assume that absence should trigger guilt, longing, or reflection in the narcissist. But for a narcissist, those feelings, empathy, remorse, or attachment, are limited, conditional, or entirely absent. What drives them is the loss of influence, the loss of attention, and the fear of losing access to a resource they once controlled. Understanding this shifts your perspective dramatically. The heartbreak that comes from missing someone is real, valid, and natural, but it is no longer complicated by the illusion that they are feeling the same way. You start to see the dynamics of the past relationship with clarity. You see the manipulation for what it was. You see the control for what it was. And you see yourself not as a victim, but as someone who gave far more than they were ever able to receive in return. This recognition is the first step toward reclaiming your emotional power. During this phase, the narcissist often experiences what can be described as a depletion of supply. When someone they depended on for constant validation, attention, and admiration disappears, they are forced to confront the fact that their usual sources of reinforcement are no longer available. Unlike you, who now experiences freedom and space, they are faced with a void they may not know how to fill. That void is uncomfortable because their sense of self is constructed around being admired, pursued, and centered in other people's lives. The longer you maintain no contact, the longer they must face the reality that the person who once gave so freely is no longer accessible. Many survivors describe noticing subtle patterns during this stage. They see posts or updates from the narcissist that seem random, almost like probes, attempts to regain some level of attention. Sometimes these appear months after the relationship ends or only when other sources of supply fail. These moments are not signs of love or regret, they are signs of desperation for validation. They reflect the narcissist's ongoing reliance on external sources to maintain self-esteem, and they also highlight the difference between genuine attachment and conditional dependency. It is common for survivors to feel a mixture of relief, disbelief, and anger when they understand this dynamic. Relief comes from recognizing that their emotional pain was not caused by a deficiency in love, but by the imbalance of giving and taking. Disbelief comes from realizing how detached the narcissist could be while still commanding so much emotional energy. And anger often arises from understanding the magnitude of the manipulation and the emotional labor that was never reciprocated. These emotions are part of the process, and they signal a growing awareness of the truth, a truth that is both painful and empowering. One woman described her experience by saying, "When I realized he didn't miss me as a person, I first felt devastated, but then I felt free. I understood that I wasn't holding on to someone's love. I was holding on to someone's need for control, And once I let that go, I started feeling lighter than I had in years. That shift in perception is the cornerstone of this stage. It allows you to stop investing emotionally in a relationship that was never mutual and to redirect that energy into yourself, your healing, and your growth. During this period, the narcissist may attempt to return if their supply dries up or if they perceive an opportunity. This return is rarely about reconciliation or remorse. It is about filling a gap in their ego. They may attempt to reconnect, sometimes subtly, sometimes directly, but the intention is not to repair a bond. It is to regain access to something they once had, a dynamic that allowed them to feel in control, admired, or validated. Recognizing this helps you respond appropriately, with awareness, with boundaries, and with the knowledge that any engagement serves them, not you. This stage also highlights a profound contrast between you and the narcissist. While they struggle to regain a sense of stability without the emotional input they once received, you begin to stabilize emotionally, precisely because you no longer give that energy away. Your healing continues. Your identity strengthens, and your capacity for self-worth expands independently. What once felt like a loss becomes a space for growth. What once felt like absence becomes freedom. You are no longer tethered to their needs or their validation. Your emotional world is finally your own. Over time, the narcissist may demonstrate frustration, anger, or even passive-aggressive attempts to regain access. Their behavior may include casual messages, mutual friend inquiries, or subtle social media activity. These are not gestures of care. They are attempts to measure the limits of your availability and to see if the dynamic can be reestablished. The power in this moment lies in your response, silence, clarity, and the refusal to re-enter a cycle that once eroded your emotional well-being. The absence you maintain becomes a mirror, reflecting back the reality of the relationship and the nature of the narcissist's motives. Recognizing that the narcissist's attachment was conditional and transactional allows you to release lingering guilt, self-doubt, and emotional obligation. You no longer interpret their actions as signs of love or loss. You begin to understand that your emotions were invested in a person who valued you for what you provided, not for who you were. This clarity is profoundly empowering because it shifts the balance. For the first time, your energy is no longer being siphoned away by someone who will never meet you as an equal. You are free to reclaim it, redirect it, and use it to rebuild your sense of self, your life, and your emotional boundaries. What emerges from this stage is a powerful awareness. The narcissist's loss is not your pain. Their frustration is not your failure. Their silence, or even their attempts to re-engage, are no longer capable of destabilizing you. The more you understand their perspective, not with compassion necessarily, but with clarity, the more firmly you stand in your own truth. The energy you once gave them, consciously or unconsciously, now belongs entirely to you. And that energy is the foundation for the life you were always meant to lead. As the silence stretches on, something profound begins to happen: clarity. It's not sudden and it's not dramatic at first. It often begins as small realizations that ripple through your mind like the faint outlines of a landscape slowly emerging from fog. You start to see patterns you didn't notice before. You recognize moments of manipulation, gaslighting, and control that once seemed harmless or confusing. You recall conversations where your feelings were minimized, dismissed, or used against you. And you begin to understand the cumulative impact of these moments on your sense of self. This clarity doesn't always feel comfortable. It can sting, but it is one of the most liberating aspects of no contact. It allows you to finally see the relationship for what it truly was, rather than what you hoped it could be. During the relationship, you may have excused behaviors, rationalized lies, or even blamed yourself for conflicts. You may have replayed incidents endlessly in your mind, asking, was it me? Could I have done something differently? Did I misunderstand? When you are no longer entangled in their manipulations, your mind begins to disentangle the threads of blame. You see that their words and actions were not a reflection of your worth, but a reflection of their need for control. You realize that love was conditional and transactional, not authentic and mutual. This awareness is often shocking because it contradicts the narrative you were trained to believe, the narrative that your happiness depended on their approval. But the shock is also freeing. It allows you to place responsibility where it belongs, not on yourself, but on the dynamics of the relationship. As clarity grows, boundaries naturally strengthen. You notice what feels safe and what feels toxic without needing to justify it. You begin to recognize behaviors that are unacceptable, not because someone told you, but because your instincts, honed by experience and reflection, guide you. You start to feel the power of choice, the power to say yes or no, to engage or withdraw, to protect your energy. For the first time, you understand that your autonomy is non-negotiable. The realization that you are in charge of your own life, your emotions, and your decisions is profoundly empowering. It is the moment when emotional freedom begins to solidify. This stage also reveals the stark contrast between you and the narcissist. While you are growing, reclaiming identity, and building resilience, the narcissist may be struggling with the absence of supply. They may attempt to re-enter your life, sometimes subtly, sometimes directly. They may send messages, show up in unexpected places, or leverage mutual friends to test your boundaries. These attempts are rarely motivated by genuine care or remorse. They are motivated by ego, by the desire to regain control, and by the discomfort of losing access to someone they once dominated. Recognizing this pattern is essential because it allows you to respond with awareness and strength rather than falling into the old cycle of reactive emotions and manipulations. A real-life example illustrates this clearly. A survivor shared that after 6 months of no contact, her former partner suddenly messaged, "I've been thinking about us." She felt a brief flicker of old emotions, but she also remembered the repeated cycles of manipulation, the moments of cruelty disguised as love, and the emotional exhaustion she endured. In that instant, she realized that the message was not about reconciliation. It was about testing whether she was still accessible. She chose not to respond. That single decision, rooted in clarity and self-awareness, marked a pivotal moment of empowerment. She recognized that she was no longer a participant in someone else's agenda. She had regained control of her own life. The clarity that emerges during this phase often extends beyond the relationship itself. Survivors begin to see patterns in other areas of life, relationships, and friendships. They notice when people are taking advantage, when boundaries are being crossed, and when emotional labor is being exploited. This heightened awareness becomes a tool for protecting oneself, building healthier relationships, and making decisions that align with true needs rather than fear or obligation. The clarity gained from no contact transforms into a lifelong skill for emotional discernment. Another remarkable aspect of this phase is the emotional recalibration that accompanies it. The intense highs and lows that characterize the relationship start to feel foreign, almost surreal. You may find yourself remembering arguments or manipulations with a sense of detachment, as if you are observing a story rather than reliving it. This detachment is not coldness. It is a protective mechanism, a way for your nervous system to reorient and heal. It allows you to engage with life from a position of strength rather than reaction. You begin to experience emotional resilience, the ability to feel deeply without being destabilized, and the capacity to respond thoughtfully rather than impulsively. The clarity also brings self-respect, which is the cornerstone of emotional liberation. You begin to understand that you are worthy of relationships that are reciprocal, supportive, and nurturing. You realize that your time, energy, and emotional resources are precious, and you no longer need to expend them on someone who cannot reciprocate or appreciate them. This recognition is not just intellectual, it is embodied. You feel it in your posture, in your choices, in the way you speak, and in the way you move through the world. It is a profound shift from survival mode to thriving mode. Over time, this stage culminates in the understanding that the relationship and the narcissist's absence served a purpose. The absence created space for growth, the silence allowed perspective, and the distance forced self-reflection. You realize that the pain, confusion, and challenges you endured were catalysts for self-discovery and empowerment. You begin to see yourself not as a victim of manipulation, but as a survivor with insight, resilience, and autonomy. The clarity that comes from no contact becomes the lens through which you view life, relationships, and your own potential. One survivor summed it up beautifully. It was only when I stopped looking for them, stopped wondering if they missed me, that I began to see myself. I realized the relationship never defined my worth. My value was always mine, waiting for me to claim it. This moment of recognition is the ultimate expression of emotional clarity. It is the realization that freedom, self-respect, and identity are not dependent on another person's behavior, but on the reclamation of your own power. As clarity deepens, so does the sense of peace, not because the past was easy, but because you now see it clearly. You understand the dynamics, the patterns, and the motives. You understand your own responses, your growth, and your emerging boundaries. And most importantly, you understand that your future is no longer dictated by someone who could never meet you as an equal. You are free to make choices based on self-awareness, self-respect, and self-love. That clarity, once gained, is irreversible. It shapes every decision, every boundary, and every relationship that comes after. It is the culmination of the emotional, psychological, and spiritual work that began the moment you stepped into silence. So when you and the narcissist both stop contacting each other, the world doesn't end. It begins again, but it begins differently for each of you. For you, it's the start of healing, clarity, identity, and emotional freedom. For them, it's the start of losing control, losing supply, and losing access. What happens next will shock you, because for the first time, the silence isn't a punishment, it's peace, it's power, it's your new beginning, and it's the version of you they never wanted to see, the one who finally understands their worth.